I'm seeing Diddy has been found guilty on 2 counts. The transportation to engage in prostitution counts, count 3 and count 5, as they pertain to Diddy's ex, Cassie Ventura, and another former girlfriend who testified under the pseudonym Jane. What I am seeing right now are guilty verdicts on count 3 and count 5. And I can tell you that prosecutors, when they argued that Diddy transported these women in male escorts across state lines to engage in prostitution, they pulled up a slew of flight and bank records, going line by line, in some cases to jurors, pointing out hotel stays, links of hotel stays. They also called in law enforcement investigators as summary witnesses to explain these lengthy, extensive records that they had pulled in this case. I think it's very interesting that these are the charges that these are the only charges that jurors found Sean Diddy Combs guilty of: transportation to engage in prostitution. And also, to argue these charges, prosecutors called male escorts to the witness stand who testified about how Diddy paid them, in some cases, hundreds to thousands of dollars to have sex with Cassie and him. And at this point, right now, we can see from this verdict sheet that Diddy has been found guilty on count 3 and count 5. He has been found not guilty on the most serious charge, racketeering conspiracy. He's been found not guilty on count 2 and count 4. Those are the sex trafficking counts. The only counts he has been found guilty of are the transportation to engage in prostitution. And I want to say that comes with a possible prison sentence of 10 years in prison. Of course, we're dealing with breaking news, so a lot of information is coming in, and we're working to learn more. But there is a crowd gathered here outside the courtroom. I'm not sure who is among this crowd, but Bill and Dana, I know you've been watching the trial closely, and you know there are a slew of Diddy supporters out here who have come every single day. It looks like what appears to be one of Diddy's supporters is out here in front of the courthouse explaining to cameras perhaps why he believes someone he supports was vindicated of the most serious charge, racketeering conspiracy. There are hundreds of cameras, and we're waiting to get some more color from inside the courtroom.
You got it.
But we know that jurors came back with this ultimatum today.
CB, I'll let you go for the moment so you can gather some more news down there. I just want to repeat the main headline, and that is this: Sean Diddy Combs acquitted of sex trafficking and racketeering. The racketeering is the most serious charge. That was count 1. That would have put him behind bars for the rest of his life. Not guilty on that charge. So to recap, of the 5 counts, 3 not guilty, Dana, and 2 guilty in Manhattan Federal Court, New York City.
Right. We want to bring back, we have Donna Rotuno that is with us, but let me just ask Paul Morrow a quick question to follow up on something you said earlier, Paul, about there would be opportunities for Diddy Combs to appeal. And on these 2 guilty counts, would that apply in your estimation, what you know of the case?
He certainly is going to appeal. Whether or not he's held in jail, I would suspect he will be. Each of these counts carries 10 years. This is the Notorious Mann Act. As many people may have heard, it's echoed down through history. There's been famous people. Charlie Chaplin was charged with this. He beat it. They got Chuck Berry on this. R. Kelly was charged with this. So very clearly, what the jury seems to have decided here is that the prostitution stuff happened, but the rest of the stuff was not coercive, and in fact, it was transactional. And that seems to be the atmospheric from these, these verdicts. And it is, you have to say, in light of what he was looking at, you have to say that this is pretty close to a victory and a rare swing and a miss for the Southern District of New York.
Paul, thank you. Stand by. Let's bring in our defense attorney now. Donna, we tried to bring in you earlier. I'll get your analysis now. The attorneys for Sean Diddy Combs argued from the beginning that on all the videos, notwithstanding the video that we saw in the hotel room from 2016, but all the videos that he recorded at his home in Los Angeles, is that there was no evidence on that video or those pictures that anyone was coerced into participating. They were making the case that they willingly participated in the acts that were seen on this videotape. And it appears the defense's strategy, at least as it pertains to that argument, has been somewhat successful. Donna, what do you think?
I agree. We have been saying all along in this case that it was overcharged by the government, that they were taking these very nuanced relationships and trying to make them criminal. And I think Mark did a really good job in his closing argument highlighting that to the jury. Overall, this is a huge loss to the government, huge. The money that they spent on this prosecution, the amount of press, notoriety. This is a definite win for Mr. Combs. I know he's still facing time in custody, but obviously he will see the light at the end of the day on this one.
Donna, do you think that his lawyers will try to say that he should not be held while at this point until the sentencing or the appeals go through?
I do think that they will make that argument. Remember, Mr. Combs has no criminal background. Mr. Combs is a businessman. Mr. Combs amassed immense wealth. He has children and family and ties to the community. He is very well known. It would be very difficult for him to fade away and get lost into the world. But the government will definitely make the argument that because of the means he is a flight risk and he has the ability to go and move anywhere that he wants to with the financial backing. So I do believe he will be held, although I do not believe he will receive a maximum 10-year sentence.
Donna, your initial reaction, you're not surprised by this. How come?
I'm not surprised by this. I think it was overcharged from the beginning. I think that in the end, it was clear that Mr. Combs engaged in certain acts that were illegal, but I do not think those crimes rose to the level of what he was charged with. And I think in the end, jurors are starting to look at these cases and say, just because you say it doesn't make it so. And when you look at the nuanced relationships between these people, I mean, you had Jane testifying that he's still paying her rent, that they still have some type of relationship, financial or otherwise. You had Cassie, who had all of the text messages saying she liked to be part of the freak-off, saying she was happy to be involved. I mean, really, I think at the end of the day, jurors look at this and say, if these people didn't believe it was criminal, why should I? Mm-hmm. And back to looking at these cases, we look at these cases through the lens that the courtroom tells us. But all we can do is say, we were not in the room when these things were happening. All we can do is look at the circumstances surrounding them, and everything surrounding it showed relationships between consenting adults. Whether there was violence or not really wasn't the issue.
Former federal prosecutor Jim Trusty joins us now with your take. Jim Trusty.
Hey guys, good to see you. Look, this is a huge victory for P. Diddy. That's the reality of it. I think, when you really march backwards from the RICO was always something that was legally available, but innovative and difficult. And when you're talking about a one-person RICO, I kept waiting for other witnesses to come in and say, I too pled guilty to RICO conspiracy. That never happened. I kept waiting for maybe an expert witness to describe how women in the course of being trafficked will have conflicting loyalties and conflicting emotions. That never happened. They just saved it all for closing arguments. So that was pretty difficult. But the RICO, which was the lead count, was only going to get you a potential life sentence if in fact you were convicted of the underlying sex trafficking. So when the sex trafficking charges peeled away, the RICO could have became at the most a 20-year charge. We're now down to 2 10-year charges, and these are glorified prostitution charges. It's a federal offense. It's the Mann Act. It has a long controversial history. But as applied today, it's a fairly rinky-dink conviction. So I think they will make a run at trying to get him released. It'll be a little bit of a barometer of whether the judge is absolutely going to incarcerate in the long run. I think he'll probably stay locked up, but we don't even know that
here you
at this
go,
point.
Jim. This is what's going on inside the courtroom to address your query. The jury is leaving the courtroom based on our producers inside. They're giving this to us by way of email. Defense asked for Combs to be released to his home in Florida. Defense is in possession of his passport. The crimes that he's been found guilty of are vastly different from the charges he was acquitted of, and I think we can agree on that now, right, in this analysis. He does not have access to his plane, which has been chartered and is now in Maui. Because this is his first offense, his attorneys asked that he's released from federal custody, willing to put up bond to make that happen, Jim.
Yeah, that's the right argument. Maybe they settle for like electronic home monitoring. The problem that he faces is he doesn't have direct ties in terms of residentially to New York, and he will always be a bit of a risk of flight just because of all of his resources. But man, oh man, I think he's got a shot at the release. And you know, the sentencing guidelines that'll be applied to his case have just dropped off a cliff. It's a very different conviction now than it would have been with the sex trafficking or the RICO charges.
Jim, in your estimation, based on what Donna Rotuno was just saying, do you think the government overcharged in this case, and which led them to this underwhelming result for them?
Yeah, I feel like that's the easiest pile-on I could ever do, right? I mean, those idiots don't know how to do RICO like I do. But what I would say is this. I mean, RICO, the reason why the Department of Justice has a whole section devoted to reviewing racketeering indictments is to kind of make sure that it's used in the intelligent way and in a way that preserves the sanctity of a very powerful statute. This one went through that process. It got approved. I get that. But it's a very unique case. It's very rare to charge a single individual and just say all of his businesses are part of the criminal enterprise. So, you know, in retrospect, absolutely an overcharge, but it was always going to be uphill. And I think it really could have been tried a little cleaner as just a pure sex trafficking and Mann Act type case.
Okay, Jim, stand by. We got some more analysis. We're going to on the air. Really appreciate you jumping on, so hang on for more, Jim.
Paul Morrow, on the RICO charge, the prosecution made it about the sex and the freak-offs, but there were other things involved that you've mentioned.
Yeah, so one of the things that was marbled into this case were the drugs and the guns. They seized some of these things at the locations where they executed search warrants. And to Jim Trustee's point, I kept waiting for the witness that was going to come together as a flip and say, look, I was part of this RICO. Yes, I signed a cooperation agreement with the government, but here's what we were doing. And we had this organization. It was running guns. It was running drugs. It was doing all of this stuff. You never really got that. And so as a result, what happens? It becomes all about the sex crimes. It became all about the sexual stuff. And the defense did a very good job of introducing all of these text messages where the women involved were affirmatively reaching out to Diddy and saying, where are you? I want to come be with you. In some instances, even saying, I want to be part of the freak-offs. I miss them. And so what you ended up with at the end of the day is a he said, she said, where the prosecution had to say, well, the women involved were suffering from battered wife, essentially. And if you could get over that hump, if you could get past that, and say, you know, to the jury, no, you know, there had been many months and they reached back out to him. That took the RICO charge with it. And a single person RICO is extremely, remember why we have RICO. It was created by an academic for the purposes of taking down the mafia. And then it was Rudy Giuliani who really figured out how to use it and apply it. And he did, in fact, break the back of the mafia here in New York City and nationwide. It's that sophisticated a statute. And in this case, it did always feel like a reach, and the jury agreed.
Paul, in your experience, when you have a witness on the stand, the main witness, who has already agreed to a financial settlement with the accused,
right?
Does that matter?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point, Bill. You know, your jurors are human beings, and, you know, sometimes we forget that. And, yeah, they're not supposed to be bringing preconceptions to the courtroom with them and so on and so forth. But just the fact that we had two unpersuadables yesterday, right, and then today going into the 4th of July weekend, and I'm not imputing their motives here, but they are human beings. And you can't ignore the calculus of, you know what, this case is all over the place. It feels weak to me. It feels transactional, which has been the argument all along from the defense. And I can tell you this as well. I have, you know, contacts in the industry, in the entertainment music industry, I should say. There was a police officer in NYPD. That was his remit, to keep an eye on the rap industry criminality. And he's kind of well known. He's written a book, and I've had him on my podcast. We've had him on Fox. And he's told me that the feeling inside the industry was very much that they don't understand the industry. The people who are prosecuting this case, and maybe even a little the defense, they don't understand the transactional nature of what goes on in this world. These guys at this level of celebrity, especially in the rap industry, they have people reaching out to them constantly, trying to get with them, trying to be part of their lives. The jury seems to have gotten that.
The reason I bring that up is because Sean Diddy Combs and Cassie Ventura had a settlement in November of 2023, and it was no small matter. It was $20 million. I believe she also won a case against the hotel in Los Angeles for about $10 million, Dana.
Paul, in New York State or New York City, what are the sentencing guidelines? Like, how does it work? What's the next step? What's the appellate process? Just walk us through like the timing of what should happen next, if you know.
Well, remember, this is a federal case, right?
Okay.
So this is all going to be done federally, irrespective of it being New York. And it is, I would expect them to keep them in, but, you know, in light of the fact that the atmospherics are that they just really, let's recognize something else. This was a fast verdict. I mean, this case went on for a good, what was it, 6 weeks, almost 2 months if you count the whole thing. And in a couple of days, they came back with this verdict. So, you know, judges are people too. And the atmospheric here from the judge may be, you know what, this thing was severely overcharged. The guy is well known. He's not going to disappear off the face of the earth. But on the other hand, he is facing jail time, and he has a boat, an infamous boat that we all know about. And, you know, the last thing any judge wants to do is grant release, and somebody at the level of P. Diddy goes MIA. So, you know, it's a little bit of a crapshoot right now whether he holds him. But ultimately, we're going to have a sentencing, and, you know, I think he'll not get the full nut on the Mann Act, which can be up to 10 years on both counts. But he'll do, potentially, if it holds up, a couple of years.
Maybe I should have asked that question to James Trusty. From the federal perspective, anything to add to that, Jim?
No, I think Paul's got it right. I mean, he's not going to get a maximum penalty here unless somehow, you know, he spits on the judge between now and sentencing. So I think he's going to have considerably lower guidelines. I think that the overcharging does come home to really hurt the prosecution, not just with the verdict, but when the defense attorney stands up at sentencing and says, look at what was charged and look where we are. You know, Your Honor, this is a glorified prostitution case, period. That's just not the type of thing that normally drives a big sentence in federal court, no matter how graphic and crazy and transactional all those details were.
Great, thank you. And I want to bring in Joshua Ritter. He is a Fox News contributor, a criminal defense attorney who can give us his perspective. We haven't heard your take on this yet. Josh, can we turn it over to you for some analysis?
Well, I guess the first thing you would say is that you have to be shocked at how badly the government overshot their expectations on this case. But if you had been watching and if you had been paying close attention, you're really not shocked by these results, because that RICO charge was pushing the envelope. I mean, there's an argument to be made that did they strictly meet the elements as the RICO charges laid out? Perhaps. But to this jury, what they saw was a man living a lifestyle that they may not understand, they may not agree with. It may be lavish, and it may include things that they will never experience. But where was the criminality in all of this? And beyond that, how are you trying to explain to me that this is a criminal enterprise? We know RICO. It applies to the mafia. How does it apply to this man who may be powerful, he may have a lot of money, he may be treating people, disrespectfully and abusively, but how does that fit into the same crime that we think of as applying to the mafia? They just overextended themselves.
Interesting. Stand by, okay, Josh. Mark Eiglarz joins our coverage too, and Mark, good morning to you. Criminal defense attorney yourself. You've been in and out inside these courtrooms for some time, and just your initial reaction. There seems to be a bit of surprise that it came back this quickly and it came back this way. What do you think, Mark?
Well, yeah, we thought they'd take a little longer, and especially after the one juror was accused of not playing nicely with the others. Who ever thought he'd ever come together and unanimously agree to any verdict? But I think that some of the major problems which have been discussed all along were real for the jurors. You start with racketeering, typically for all of us, doesn't fit for a guy who's into lube and Astroglide. It's really reserved for Al Capone. And so people think of it that way. And in this case, I don't know if they really felt that he had a criminal enterprise. And I think that's what you're going to hear from the jurors. As it relates to the other two serious counts that he was acquitted of, this was always about consent or whether it was coercion. And there were numerous opportunities, I think the jurors are going to find or found that they could have left if they really weren't into it. And yeah, there were times where maybe force was used, but we're not going to find that this was sex trafficking, which also has a different image, for most people when you think of sex trafficking. So it's not uncommon at all. They came to this verdict. And I think in spite of Dawn Hughes's testimony, the expert psychologist who testified, they just didn't believe in the trauma bond. And they found that these women who helped prepare some of these freak-offs, they weren't being trafficked.
We did not. Obviously, we're not in the courtroom. That video that was made public that was leaked from the hotel in Los Angeles, it's awful. It's 9 years ago, it's 2016, and she sued the hotel because of the leak, and that's how she was able to acquire that $10 million settlement. But from our understanding, there are dozens and dozens of videos of these freak-offs that Diddy recorded on his iPad or cameras that he had set up at his home in Los Angeles. And what the attorneys are arguing, that, like trial experts are arguing, that everyone who participated in this, they were adults and they could make up their own minds as to whether or not they wanted to be there or not. And the state's making the case that no, they were coerced into all of this. And Diddy's attorneys are saying, no, you can make up your own mind. And that, it seems that that's the argument the jury bought, Mark.
Yeah, no, and with good reason. Listen, the government can continue to make that argument, but 12 people who didn't know each other from all different forms of life, look at their jobs, they're all different professions, they all came together and unanimously, all 12 of them felt that the government did not prove this case beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. That sends a clear message to the government.
Okay, here's more from inside the courtroom. This could be significant too, Dana. Here we go. Our producers write the following. The defense says it's fine if travel is restricted for Diddy Combs to New York City, Florida, and Los Angeles. The government objects on grounds of being a flight risk. The government says that Mark Agnifilo is the lead attorney for Diddy, is downplaying the severity of the crimes that Combs has been convicted of. Government says he continued with illegal activities while under investigation, namely drug use. Government also says they should detain the defendant until sentencing. Judges asking for a letter from both sides making their case for Combs' detention status. They're going to be back in court this afternoon because the letters are due at 1 o'clock Eastern. Court will then meet again sometime after that point. Mark, to you, does that all line up with what you would assume would happen next?
I have a real problem with the government's position at this point. Sounds a little bit like sore losers. If the only charges he had were the ones he was convicted of, all day long in federal court, he'd be given some type of release. Probably not even an ankle monitor, but now they're even saying, all right, we're okay with an ankle monitor. He was acquitted. He is innocent of those serious charges. So I think it's intellectually dishonest for the government to say that he's such a flight risk over the remaining charges. Albeit he's facing some years in prison, but what his face is extremely recognizable. He's now going to flee the jurisdiction when he's facing a couple of years in prison, plus all the credit for the time that he's already served. I just think they should have stipulated, all right, house arrest, that works for us.
And just a little bit more color from inside the courtroom. The judge apparently, in a lighter moment, joked that he assumed that Combs did not want to return to the Manhattan Detention Center. And Combs shook his head very exaggerately and then looked up with his hands together as if praying. Paul Morrow, I'm assuming that this also has been quite an ordeal for the NYPD and security services in order to deal with this trial, because as you can even see there from the live pictures, there's a lot of people down there. There's been a lot of interest in this case.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a tangential thing to these cases, but federal court in Manhattan for the Southern District is downtown. That is a big conglomeration of court buildings of all different types, government buildings, not far from 26 Fed, where you have ICE, and we've had those riots down there. So, sure, the NYPD, as ever, has to step up here. You got to get duty charts. You have to have people assigned there every day. There are people on overtime. It costs, but that's the job. They're very good at this kind of stuff. When it comes to crowd control, they have it down, and I think they showed it here because there were no reports of much disruption in and around the courthouse, which matters because we did see that kind of thing, at least in the first Karen Reed trial, and it can influence things.
So prosecutors were making the argument that the physical abuse by Combs, coupled with threats to release videos of the freak-offs and to stop paying rent on the homes for Cassie and for this woman who goes by the name of Jane, showed a pattern of coercion. So you've got 7 weeks of testimony. The jury heard from a total of 34 witnesses. Jim Trusty, I don't know if victory or defeat is the way you want to categorize this, but when you think about what he was up against, did he win?
Yeah, it's a victory. I mean, I really don't hesitate about that. I mean, again, Mann Act and federal sounds very serious, big, long trial, but those convictions are rinky-dink. That's almost stipulated that he had prostitutes coming in across state lines, which is all that's required for that. And let me go back to, Dana, you raised that, you mentioned that comment from the judge a couple minutes ago. I'd say we're at like 90-10 he's going to get released, because you'd have to be a pretty sadistic judge to joke around with the defendant about release and then not release him. Okay. So I think that he's about to get a pass where he'll be, maybe limited to a couple of places, maybe not have contact with various people. But I think by the end of the day, Diddy is out with some conditions of release.
Thank you. And let's bring in CB Cotton. She's live outside the Manhattan Federal Court in New York City. Been on this case from the beginning. CB, any other updates?
Well, Dana, as you guys were just mentioning, prosecutors made the case to the judge that arguing Diddy was charged with some very serious crimes and suggesting that he may continue to commit crimes if he is allowed to be released. However, the defense has made the case at this point that they feel their client's travel should be restricted. They're fine with the government having possession of their client's passport. And once again, they pointed out that the crimes Diddy was found guilty of are vastly different than the charges he was acquitted of. So right now, the judge has told both sides to make their argument and submit those arguments to him in a letter by 1 p.m. local time. And so we're going to be out here monitoring for that. But just to speak to the magnitude of what has happened this morning, jurors were only in the deliberations room for about an hour, and they returned an acquittal on the most serious charges Diddy was facing: racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. We know they found him guilty of those 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Each carries a max penalty of up to 10 years in prison. So while we wait to see what comes, there's a lot more to come in terms of the possible sentencing in this case. I want to recap what got us up to this point and go back to the closing arguments. Lead defense attorney Mark Agnifilo told jurors repeatedly that this was an exaggerated and a false trial, and he even appeared to mock some of the government's evidence photos as weak, talking about the baby oil, talking about the guns. At one point he said, quote, "The streets of America were saved from Astroglide," and he repeatedly accused prosecutors of criminalizing Diddy's swinger sex life. He also said that he pulled up a big poster board of Diddy with some of his former employees, members of Bad Boy Records, and he pointed to that picture and he said, "That's your racketeering conspiracy. That's your criminal enterprise." And he sort of chuckled. He took this flippant tone with jurors, and he was moving inside the courtroom back and forth as he tried to make this case to jurors that Diddy was not guilty of these serious charges. The next steps from here at the courthouse are as we wait and see what both sides argue in terms of next steps for Diddy. Will he be allowed to have to leave prison and have limited travel, which is what defense attorneys want, or will he be sent back to prison? Prosecutors are trying to convince the judge of that. They both have to send their arguments to the judge by 1 p.m. local time. I'm reading some additional reports from the courtroom, and they talk about just how enthusiastic Diddy's defense team was inside. As we've heard from some of our experts, this outcome this morning is perhaps the best case scenario for Diddy, other than an outright acquittal on all the charges.
All right, C.B. Cotton, can you tell us a little bit more about the crowd that's gathered there? Is that typical, or is it more right now? What do you get? What's the feeling?
Right now, I would say there are definitely more than are usually out here. Typically, every day, I would say there are at least 24 people outside the courtroom. Now it looks like there are more than 100 people gathered outside the courthouse. And from what I can see, it looks like a lot of Diddy supporters. Those are the people who have been out here live streaming this trial every single day, giving their analysis, their assessment on the witness testimony. We've seen some heated arguments out here this morning. A lot of people are hoping to get a glimpse of attorneys on either side to see whether they exit the courtroom today. There's so much interest in this case, Dana, as we've seen from the very, very start, from the moment that Diddy was arrested. The interest just skyrocketed. So many people wanted to know more about what was to come.
CB, stand by. I want to bring back Mark Eiglarsh. And Dana, you think about Cassie Ventura. She's on the stand, right? She was just a couple weeks away from giving
was 9 months pregnant.
Birth. And according to reports, she gave birth to a baby boy at the end of May. So she literally testified a week or 10 days before she went to a New York hospital and gave birth. And you know, she put her life out there for the whole public to learn about. And I don't know about your experience with witnesses who say, "Listen, I'm doing this, and people are going to learn some things about me." And it's not without risk, personal risk, Mark.
For sure. No, it's courageous. Listen, we tend in society to say you're a winner or you're a loser. And in this case, well, her charges weren't sustained by the jury, so she's a loser. That's far from the criticism that she should endure. She showed great courage by coming forward. The burden of proof is extremely high in criminal court. Not guilty doesn't mean that he's innocent. It means it wasn't proven. And in her coming forward, number one, he was exposed. We all know what he's about now, number one. And so he was very much harmed for the rest of his life. Secondly, without her testimony, I don't know that they would have been able to bring forward a conviction on the 2 counts that ultimately will keep him imprisoned, most likely. So kudos to her for coming forward. She clearly was a victim in every sense of the word. We all saw that. Maybe not, according to the jury, of what he was accused of in terms of sex trafficking, but beyond all doubt, she was a domestic violence victim, and kudos for her for coming forward.
Josh Ritter, any comment on that?
Yeah, I thought it was incredibly brave, but if there's any failing, it's not placed at her feet. It's placed at the feet of the prosecutors and other law enforcement who didn't take action earlier. The fact that that crime took place in front of our own eyes on that video camera in Los Angeles years earlier and nothing was done about it, that's where the blame really lies, not with her. Kudos to her. I agree with Mark for having the bravery to come in and testify. It's just unfortunate that was not able to secure a conviction. But I think when it came all down to it, the jurors taking a look at all of this, his lifestyle, they realized that there's a difference between doing something with regret, doing something with disgust, doing something that you may be reluctant about later on, and doing something willfully. And that's what the whole point of this trial was about, was consent, and whether or not these people actually consented to what took place, as outrageous as it was and as much as they regretted it afterwards. The government just was not able to prove consent.
Paul Morrow, same question. And as you think about answering that, what do you believe the judge does this afternoon?
Well, at first, as I said, before the charges came down, before the verdict came down, I was 95-5 that the judge would hold on to him. Then when we got the verdict, I was about 50-50. But I got to agree with Jim Trusty. After that comment from the judge, once again, these people are human beings. And when the judge is joking around with the defendant, that's about as big a tell as you can get. To now remand him to jail, I don't see happening. So I would agree that there's a very good chance he's going to get out. He's going to have stipulations on where he can travel. I don't think they'll ankle bracelet him or anything like that, but he's going to be confined to a particular area. As far as Cassie goes, one of the things we should remember here is the youth of the women involved. We don't know about the other woman, but Cassie was young, and that makes you susceptible, and yet she did have the courage to come forward. The other side of that, if you're sitting with the jury, is as you mentioned earlier, Bill, he had gotten a very big settlement. And the feeling from the jury may have been, again, that this looks transactional. They were reaching out to him. She had gotten a lot of money. Is she really that damaged? And again, I am not adopting that position, but that does seem to be what the calculus of the jury was.
And Paul, right now we've just been watching Diddy's family leaving the courthouse for now. Assume they will be back around 1 o'clock when the judge says that he'll consider all of these things about his possible release, even if it is restricted, as we get this verdict today. Jim Trusty, back at DOJ headquarters. What happens after a loss like this?
It doesn't make the whole aircraft carrier turn around. I think there is a lesson in terms of, the aggressive use of RICO. My old section, it's now the violent crime and racketeering section, is responsible for kind of protecting the statute, making sure it's not used in an overreaching fashion. The problem is you're getting a lot of self-reporting from the attorneys that are proposing using it, and you don't really want to pick a fight and say you're not allowed to ever use this statute. So they went out on an innovative use of RICO, legally available, but practically difficult. And I think it complicated the case. And, one other thing I keep thinking about, Dana, the first probably 2 weeks of this trial was entirely devoted to essentially domestic violence. And domestic violence, even stuff caught on video at hotels, really horrible batteries and assaults, they're not RICO predicates. Like, they are not by themselves the building blocks that get you a RICO. So, I thought there was just a lot of kind of short-sighted moments in terms of how this thing was presented to the jury. And we're left with a situation where, I'm with Paul. I think that, there's going to be a hell of a celebration in South Florida tonight for Sean Combs' family, because I'm pretty sure he gets out.
So here's some more color from inside the courtroom. When the not guilty verdicts were read, so 2 of them were guilty. There were excited squeals in the courtroom coming from his supporters. Combs was nodding, put his hands in prayer. Kids and supporters could be heard excitedly saying yes, also sighs of relief as described here. When the judge pulled the jurors, Combs nodded along. He also nodded when the judge spoke to the jurors about speaking to the media and thanked the jurors. When the judge said Mr. Combs doesn't want to go back to the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, I do believe, as they were talking about release, Combs nodded vigorously in agreement for there. Just to tab down a little bit longer here, Combs could be heard saying, "Thank God," and "I love you" several times. The lawyers all hugged. Tenny Garrigus was crying as she hugged the Combs family. Family all embraced. There were handshakes. People in the courtroom shouted, "Dream Team," to the lawyers. I asked the question earlier, Jim, if this is, did he win? And based on that reaction, they agree too, that he did.
Yeah, I mean, you almost wonder a little bit, do you want to be called a dream team in light of, the association with OJ's trial? But look, it's a strong moment for these lawyers. It's a powerful moment for Combs. Hopefully there's a lesson of sorts that he'll take away from this, other than just, look at me, I got away with it. I think that there was a very sordid culture that was exposed. It was kind of like everybody that watched this trial felt dirtier just from witnessing it. And it was foreign to a lot of people, and perhaps foreign to some of these jurors. And that maybe goes back to like the transactional nature of it, or the conflicting loyalties. A tough case, again, probably overcharged, not tried to perfection from the government. But if you're a defense attorney, you've got a good day here. You're going to have a nice 4th of July.
Get a final comment from Mark on that.
Yeah, I think that everybody did the best that they could. I don't think that merely because the government didn't get a conviction means that they overcharged this or did anything wrong. It's a tough case. They knew it was going to be tough, and they did get 2 convictions that I don't think they would have gotten but for giving the jurors a complete picture. And they were only able to give that complete picture because they brought the racketeering charge, and they were able to get in things that normally would be barred by the statute of limitations.
Right, and that evidence pointed to that. Thank you to all of our contributors and to Jim Trusty, Paul Morrow, Mark Eiglarsh, and Josh Ritter, and Donna Rotuno, and certainly C.B. Cotton, who's been on this case from the beginning. Thank you so much.
So here's the summary. Transportation engaged in prostitution, guilty on 2 counts. Sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, not guilty. And the big one, racketeering, not guilty.
And we wait to find out what happens to him this afternoon around 1 o'clock. In the meantime, Harris Faulkner takes you to the next hour.
And the breaking news now, that verdict reached in the sex trafficking trial of hip-hop mogul Sean Diddy Combs. I'm Harris Faulkner. You are in the Faulkner Focus. Combs was accused of being the ringleader of an alleged enterprise that abused and coerced women in drug-fueled sex parties with prostitutes, which he called freak-offs, and then threatened them into silence. Diddy will walk away from the most serious charges against him. Jurors found him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution, but not guilty on 2 counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and not guilty on 1 count of racketeering conspiracy. Our correspondent now, C.B. Cotton. Let's go to her for the very latest. So, C.B., a lot of information coming in now about the color inside the courtroom. What can you tell us?
Hey, Harris. Well, there is a lot of anxious energy out here because while we have this verdict from the jury, the next steps are for both sides to make their case to the judge about whether Diddy should remain in custody until sentencing. Both sides have until 1 p.m. local time to make their case to the judge. And so while we wait to see what comes out of that, I do want to give some of that color from inside the courtroom about what happened today. Jurors were only inside the deliberations room for about an hour. And in total, since Monday, they had spent about 14 hours in total deliberating on Diddy's fate. Today, they came back with an acquittal on the most serious charges Diddy was facing: racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. Like you mentioned, they did find Diddy guilty on 2 counts: transportation to engage in prostitution. Each one of those charges carries a max penalty of up to 10 years in prison. When the not guilty verdicts were read inside the courtroom today, there were excited squeals coming from inside, coming from the supporters, coming from people on Diddy's defense team. Diddy was nodding. He put his hands in prayer. And our courtroom producer also heard his children and supporters saying yes repeatedly over and over with lots of excitement. There were also several sighs of relief heard by our courtroom producers. And when the judge polled the jurors one by one about their verdict, our producer saw Diddy nodding his head as those responses were said to the judge. Diddy also nodded when the judge spoke to jurors and explained to them about speaking to the media, and he thanked the jury. The judge made a remark and said, "I'm sure you don't want to go back to prison." And our producer saw Diddy nodding vigorously in agreement. So we'll have to see where he goes next from here. But after the judge left the bench, we saw a lot more emotion from inside. Diddy clapped with his family and supporters in the courtroom. His family was cheering, and Diddy could be heard saying, "Thank God," and "I love you" several times. That's when all the lawyers hugged each other. And one of the defense attorneys, Tinny Garrigo, she was crying as she hugged Diddy's family. Now we wait to see what are the next steps. Where does he go from here now that he has been acquitted on the most serious charges in this case? Harris, back to you.
C.B. Cotton, thank you very much. And with all of that scene set, let's go to Donna Rotuno, criminal defense attorney and Fox News contributor. So, Donna, I don't know if you could hear C.B. Cotton reporting, but it's the next steps that we're focused on, and if Diddy would ever see any time in a sequestered way, either behind bars, home on lockdown there. What are you thinking is in his future next?
So I was able to hear CB, and I definitely think that he will have some form of confinement. the federal government is not going to put him on any type of house arrest. If the judge sentences him to prison time, he will do that in a federal prison system, housing unit. But otherwise, I don't think it's going to be a very long time, a maximum of 10 years. And given the circumstances here and given his no background, his extensive business dealings, I just don't see that the court will keep him for a 10-year maximum sentence.
Real quickly, what worked for the defense?
Well, I think what worked for the defense was they were able to point out these nuanced relationships and whose decision is it to decide whether or not they were proper relationships or relationships you or I may have been involved in. These were relationships that two consenting adults or multiple consenting adults were involved in, and they got to make those decisions. And were there violence and were there violent acts as part of those relationships? Yes, there were, but those were not the things that he was charged with. So I think moving forward, we're really going to see some interesting conversation about this decision.
All right, I want to move on to this, another huge story today. And I know right now we should tell our audience you're in Boise, Idaho for the Brian Kohberger hearing. Kohberger is expected to plead guilty to murdering 4 college students in 2023. That hearing is set to begin in about 2 hours from now, and it is part of a plea deal struck so that he could stay alive. He avoids the death penalty. Kohberger will enter that plea today, but he won't be required to explain why he killed or how he carried out the crimes exactly. And it's my understanding that he won't have to apologize either. Here's Fox Nation host Nancy Grace.
We will never know what really happened. We would learn that at trial, but there's not going to be a trial. He will be forever shrouded in the mystique like Ted Bundy and Rex Heuermann and BTK.
Donna, can we just focus for a moment on that part about how there's no remorse that has to be shown? It's you just go and then you're in prison. No facing the family with any words of apology, none of that. Sometimes you'll see that. Was that negotiated out? How did we get to this point?
It must have been. If we're not going to see it in this case, it must have been. But you have to remember, in any circumstances, whether there was a